All right, everybody, we are live, and this is channel Philosapiens, where religion meets reason. And with me, as always, is Martin, and this is an English stream. And what we're gonna do today, or what planning to do, is to review a conversation between, I forgot the channel name. I think it's Incisive Thoughts, and the person, I think I came across this channel for the first time. I don't know. I don't even know who the person is. I think his name is Khalid, and he's having an interview with Justin Barrett. If you guys have watched our channel for quite some time, you remember that we critiqued the study of children are born believers, basically, and that's by Justin Barrett. So his college is interviewing on his channel Justin Barrett. And so what we wanted to do was to critique that conversation. Large part of that conversation we have already discussed in our earlier critique, and we'll see what we can do to advance from that point to where this conversation is happening. Probably we'll pick whatever the criticisms that I have for our points, basically. But before that, welcome, Harden. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm very good. How are you?
Good. I think as of now we have only one Techmancy tips. Okay, Techmans. I think this stream is in English, so stay put if you understand it. Unless otherwise, probably you'll have to wait when we have our Hindi Urdu stream. So, without any further ado, I think I'll add the video clip. The title is Dr. Justin Barrett's Argument for God and the Naturalness of Religion, basically. Madan, before we start, do you have anything to add, or shall we just dive right into it?
No, I just want to say that we reviewed Justin Barrett's book, roughly speaking, obviously as far as you can in a book, in the last episode of this particular edition, if you want to call it, where we were covering, are we born believers? So you should be able to find part one, where we extensively go through a whole swathe of the book by Justin Barrett called Born Believers. I recall Born Believers, and in that we'd go through many of the issues with his psychological studies that he uses to frame his conclusions and his philosophy, right? And we go into that in very much detail that we're probably not going to be able to go into here. What we're going to be doing here mainly is, because the video is 2 hours long, we're going to try and select areas of the video that might be relevant to addressing some of our objections that we raised in the first episode. Can you see down there? There's an episode on, I think it's the top right. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's the top right is the first part that we reviewed, and that was probably about 5 months back or so, I think, right?
Yes.
So anybody who's willing to check that out, basically, because we have raised some arguments against this argument already. So that's a good video to watch. That's a good live stream to watch, not live stream. Good stream to watch, and then maybe come back to this. You can still watch it with us, along with us, and maybe you'll get the idea as to what the arguments were by just going through them with us here. So yeah, I think just wanted to show that there is that part one available already, right? And this is as is also titled part two of that same conversation. Basically, it's just that it's happening as a live conversation between Khalid and Justin Barrett. And some of the points, as you'll hear, probably you may not hear in here, but Justin Barrett has retracted basically his position somewhat on some of the probably minor issues, right? So yeah, that's that.
Yeah, I mean, the main issues that we main common themes in terms of the critical remarks that we mentioned regarding Justin Barrett's work is that, number one, he's a fringe minority of scientists who are interpreting a body of psychological work in a particular way, using one's ideological narrative framework, right? That has not been commonly accepted amongst the mainstream psychological scientists. In other words, it is not a unequivocal, unambiguous fact amongst mainstream psychologists, clinical psychologists, or whatever you want to call it, behavioral psychologists, developmental psychologists, doesn't matter, evolutionary psychologists, none of them agree to the fact overall that there is a natural belief in God, etc., right? Or something like that, that you're born believing in God or whatsoever, etc. This is a particular interpretation by this particular Christian Dr. Justin Barrett. I think he's a Christian. So
I think he's a Christian, right? I think.
Yeah. Now, so it's not like the 5 big personality traits, or something like psychoanalysis, or some other stuff that is, although psychoanalysis, the Freudian type, has been debunked, but modern day psychoanalysis or other facts within psychology that generally have this kind of consensus, right? Keep in mind, psychology is also a very specious science. 50% of its work is not replicated. I'm not contesting that this is not replicated. It's just that it's not been accepted by mainstream psychologists. But this is so in other words, the science is there. The interpretation is probably what is wrong. The conclusions is probably what is wrong that Justin Barrett is making. That was one of
I think Madan, let me just add this as well. I think where I would disagree with you is that science is there, but I think methodologies are not probably. I mean, I would even contest the methodologies. So you can say it's still a science, but I would say it's probably not a proper science in the way they have conducted the studies. And the studies are out there. I think anybody who's listened to our first conversation, that's where one of the very strongest points that we made as well, that we are suspicious of the methodologies that they have used, basically. Remember, Madan, you probably remember as well, that we questioned the what's her name? Patricia. What's her last name?
Oliviera.
Oliviera Petrovic, right? Oliviera Petrovic, and we said that she chose children of the age group of 8 to 10 for that study from some London school, basically, right? And we said this is highly suspicious, basically, because for that age group to have already formed that belief system is pretty obvious in a sense. But in your studies, you should be aiming for some young children and show that as well, probably. But anyways, I think I'm going a step ahead of myself pretty much. So, yeah, anyways,
there are certain studies that have methodology issues, etc. But it depends what you mean, because some of the studies that were conducted were for an entirely different purpose, right? So in terms of methodology, the methodologies were fine, but just not for the purpose that they're trying to wield for the conclusion, weaponize for the conclusion, which is, that it determines or it enables us to see, for example, that there is a natural belief, right? And here, the trick is not at the studies themselves; it's the conceptual analysis of the studies, right?
I think I agree. I think it's I see both the problems, basically. I mean, I agree that the interpretation is a huge problem, but at the same time, I'm seeing that not all the studies may have that same methodological problems, but at least some of the studies may have those. Yeah,
I mean, exactly. Some of them do. So that's why it's difficult to say whether the studies have a methodological defect. I mean, it probably has a methodological defect in relation to the goal that you're trying to achieve. If you're trying to determine that this is learned through natural, biological, innate features, then you need to control the environment very well, right? If that is the goal. But I don't know whether the goal of the study was something.
Maybe we should be agnostic about that. I agree.
Yeah.
Okay, let's be agnostic.
That's what I kind of mean. So that's why right now, so in relation to a particular goal, there are methodological defects or methodological handicaps or constraints that prevent Justin Barrett from making those kind of conclusions. But that's not the only issue. I mean, what in more detail the issue, summarizing, but in terms of like the pillars of the problem, like many pillars of problems here. like the first pillar would be that difficulties in trying to distinguish between nature and nurture, right? To control the environment versus what is biological. To difficulties in the conceptual kind of definition of what nature here is, because what Barrett contends in his book is that this idea of, he kind of proposes this idea of, I forgot the terminology, but it's environmental naturalism or something like that.
Maturism.
Maturation, yeah, maturation.
Maturation.
Yeah, maturation naturalness. That's not environmental naturalness. Maturation naturalness, in which, for example, providing that there are certain environments, normal, he says, amongst average and normal environments, these skills and habits will emerge at one particular time during adolescence or social development, right? Despite the culture, despite the time or era, something like that. So as long as it's a normal environment. And one of our criticism was that it almost kind of rigs the situation, rigs the data, given that it kind of assumes nature has a role to be played alongside, tandem with the environment, which everybody already knows. All psychologists and biologists already know that nothing is entirely, almost nothing, especially when it comes to personality and behavior, is entirely 100% innate, right? There's a connection between environment and the nature, environment and your genetics, environment and your DNA. And in this case, by having this such a broad definition, such a reflexive definition, elastic definition, right? He kind of already admits that you need a environment for these beliefs to emerge, right? And he kind of rigs it in that respect, I would say. So that's another fundamental issue. And then of course our a third pillar of the issues that we raised was that, nature is something being natural doesn't equal to it being correct, moral, or truthful. I can have a natural belief in something. That doesn't follow that the propositional merits, the content of the belief, the truthfulness is correct. For example, we may have a natural belief in several things, like we have lots of cognitive biases, 150 illusions of the brain, systematically under testable conditions. We, for example, systematically go wrong in terms of analyzing things. We have subject to lots of optical illusions, and this is innate, right? But it doesn't follow that. It doesn't follow that it's true, right? Just because it's innate, because we analyze these cognitive defects by some other theory of truth. Let's say the correspondence theory of truth, to see whether or not those beliefs hold some merit. Are they sound? Are they valid? And if the soundness and validity can be challenged, then the mere fact that it's natural doesn't mean that it's true or reliable. It's not a reliable faculty. So that was another big issue. So I'm going to stop there for now, because I don't want to go into all of them. But those are the main kind of issues that we thought. And now let's hear what Barrett has to say to some of them. We're going to pick and choose certain aspects of the video that might be the most relevant to it, and see what we can learn from it.
All right. Yes. Yeah. Well summarized, Madan. And thanks to Techman Steps for supporting us. I know Techman Steps has supported us earlier as well. So thanks once again. His comment is, if infinite time disorder can be in order without fraction. Okay, I'm not quite sure I understand. Can you understand this, Madan?
I'm trying to.
There's no change. I think if there's no change, I think he wants to write.
If infinite time disorder can be in order
without FRC. What is FRC? Sure. Changer. Techmans, what do you want to mean? What do you want to mean by changer? Or change, you mean? Or changer as in creator, or someone who changes. Okay. So you're saying, can an infinite time disorder become order, right? With for without force? Okay, okay, okay. Or a changer, basically. Mm, I mean, you can still have a force, but why does it? Why does that force need to be an agency? Basically, that's the question, basically, right? So, and there could be processes as well which could attain, uh, you know, sub order within a part of that disorder. And that's something you can see within our own universe as well. You can say that the entropy is increasing throughout our universe as a whole, basically, right, in a closed system. But within that, there are pockets where the order is getting born, pretty much, if you can use that terminology, right? So it's not that order cannot come from within disorder. You can still have those pockets where order can arise from within disorder, right? All it takes is probably certain forces. I think you can there are a couple of videos which illustrate that, and I forgot the name of the person who has made those videos, basically. And it's done with the pendulum. If you search something like pendulum disorder to order or entropy example, you'll find those videos as well. That guy illustrates how from a very completely disordered state you can get order. So anyways, so back to our review here. All right.
Yeah, since Techman Tips, you've obviously given us a donation, and obviously asked a question as well. If you don't feel like Philo has fully answered your question, or you're still confused, what you could do is you could write to us on our email, and we could give more attention to it, maybe even research the question, and give you in our next video, or maybe even a written answer to the question. It's up to you.
Yeah. I don't know if you got the answer that you were looking for, but yeah, I think we can tackle it again if you're not still satisfied. But to answer your question, it's still possible to have the change without a force. Basically, that's what I'm saying. I mean, the force is needed, but it doesn't have to have an agency. Basically, that's what I mean, right? And I think that's what your point was, that basically can it be done without a changer, basically. And I'm assuming by a changer you imply that it has to have an agency. So anyway, okay, let's bring our review back on the screen.
So then we have to investigate under normal conditions. Is it like, is it the default? Right. So when we come to the next question, which is when it comes to God, so then we have to investigate under normal conditions. Is it like, is it the default for under normal conditions for people to believe in something like a God, like an agent, to see agency in nature and teleology?
That's right. That's good. So clearly you've done your homework. Well done. Yes, I'm one of a number of scholars. Some of us believe in God and some don't. I want to be clear about that. Not everybody is sort of religious in any kind of traditional sense here, and some are definitely not. But those of us working in cognitive science of religion, at least a lot of us, think that one of the reasons why belief in God is so widespread across cultures and throughout history, at least one kind of God, and often gods who are involved in bringing about the natural order around us, that account for why there are birds outside my window, why the sun does shine, why there's a world at all. That belief in these kinds of gods arise in part because we have a natural ready.
Just a small comment, Mahadan, over here, and for our audience. This is not particularly very clear to me that all the civilizations all throughout human history have had a belief in a god or gods. Basically, I think we do have rock arts from quite a few thousands of years back, where some of the civilizations had that kind of a belief system, where they had shown some spiritual images within their rock arts, basically. But not all of them have shown such propensity towards belief in one god or multiple gods, or any kind of spiritual predisposition, basically. So I think this comment from Justin, I think, seems a little too maybe a hyperbole, if I can say that. Maybe he's I would say it's not particularly correct, to be honest.
Yeah.
Yep.
You want to add something to it?
No, it's all right. Continue.
Sure.
Natural predispositions to form those beliefs. We're ready to believe those. And why are we ready to believe those? Because of these different belief forming faculties that we have in our heads that do lots of just ordinary work. They're not special religion faculties or something like that. It's not that there's a little neural cluster that's, all right, that's the God thing. It's like, no, it's the whole thing is the God thing, it turns out. That, for instance, the work by developmental psychologist Deborah Kellerman over the last 25 years or so has shown in a really nice incremental way that from early childhood, we have a strong tendency to see design and purpose in the natural world. When we look out and we see mountains or rivers or trees or birds, we think they have a purpose. They have a function. And a little bit like Plantinga's argument, that function is best accounted for by someone gave them that purpose. Maybe that's why they were created, or at least arranged in such a way that they have that kind of a purpose. She's developed very clever experiments to investigate this. Many of them are giving children examples, 3-4-year-old children, examples of pictures of animals like a tiger, and having them, generate explanations of the tiger. Why do we have tigers? And then taking those explanations and then having children choose between different kinds of explanations, purely mechanical explanations or purposeful, what are called teleological explanations that has purpose or design. And children tend to prefer, oh no, tigers are here for a reason. They're here to, and they may come up with bad reasons for why a tiger is here. Oh, tigers are supposed to be in the zoo. Well, that's a silly reason. But it also could be, tigers are here to, eat goats. That's what tigers are for, is to eat goats and terrorize villagers. That's kind of the purpose of the tiger. Like, and then
so the interesting part is that still they have some teleological.
Yeah. So here's one of the issues with the general kind of methodology being used. So indeed, there are scientific studies on this, but the issues is the conclusions being drawn from them in light of this, where, for example, one wants to say that that the children are naturally, as a conclusion perhaps, the children are naturally, for example, steering towards the idea of there's a purpose or designer, and this is natural. And when we look at Justin Barrett's book on what he means by natural, he's talking about maturational naturalist hypothesis. The maturational naturalist.
Exactly.
Right. So now, let me just be clear here. There's nothing wrong with something being natural and biological at a particular time or triggered by some sort of environmental cue. Yeah, let's say, for example, puberty, which you're not going to see that from birth. You're going to see puberty emerge at a particular time, right? Obviously triggered it's completely fine to think, therefore, that certain things will emerge in a particular time of your of development of your age. It won't exist right from birth, right? And furthermore, it does require some environmental sort of input and outputs, right? For example, you need food, you need healthy environments, and in completely abnormal environmental conditions, if you're not given the right amount of food, you may not go through puberty in the best way, right? But my point here is that what we can determine for puberty having a natural component like that, right? More than a natural component, I would say, than these kind of things is the crucial difference, right? Because the maturational naturalistic hypothesis here is going to be highly epistemologically difficult to verify. I'm not saying there's no ontology behind it. It may very well be the case that ontologically there are certain beliefs, values, preferences, attitudes that we get from our biology, or biology plays a heavy emphasis on. My point is, this particular question, epistemologically, not ontologically, epistemologically, is hard to determine based on the studies that Barrett examines in his book, right? Reason being, like that Deborah person that he was talking about, the PhD,
Deborah Kellerman.
Deborah Kellerman, I suspect, is related to, is it David Kahneman? I mean, Daniel Kahneman, the famous psychologist, Daniel Kahneman, who talks about, thinking fast and slow, award-winning psychologist. I suspect she's related to her. I'd be surprised if she's not. I might be wrong. I might be wrong. But whatever the case.
Yeah, I don't know that either. Yeah.
Right. So the problem with the studies is that it's hard to determine that this is actually natural. Reason being, the kids that they get, one, they've been exposed to a society already teaching them about design everywhere they go, right? Everywhere they go, right? What is one of the first things that they learn when you're young? You learn, for example, your mom cooks you food. Yeah, then you learn that toys are made by a manufacturer. Then you learn that, for example, the televisions were created in a factory. You go to school, you see the cars, and you learn that human beings created cars. So the first thing that you learn is that designers create these sort of design-like functions, objects, and they have a purpose embedded within them by the designer, the creator, the manufacturer. So now when these studies, for example, look at natural objects, natural artifacts, and the child, for example, then goes, I think there's a designer behind it. I think there's a purpose behind it. Are they just coming to this conclusion, without any reasoning, without any learning, social learning or biases that they've got from the environment? Well, we've already got a situation now where they did learn about mugs and coffees and sandwiches and fridges being created by people. So what is that bias? That learning is what is making them, what is operating behind the conclusion that the tree therefore has a creator, the tiger therefore has a creator, stars therefore has a creator. And that is what I mean by the naturalistic hypothesis, the naturalism.
Naturalism, right?
It's very, very difficult, at least in this context, to disentangle the variables, to show that it really is just nature and not just nurture here. The best way to test this would be to find a child who has not found any designed objects in his lifetime. A child that was born in a closet, came out of the closet, right? And he or she has not learned about coffee mugs, cars, mom makes food, mom makes breakfast, and then show him, let's say, a tiger. So where did this tiger come from? Do they, for example, also think the tigers come from a designer or something like that? That would be a better experiment. The problem is with the maturational naturalistic hypothesis, it will say that this is not a normal environment and therefore rigging somewhat the difficulty. So in that sense, then you need a normal environment, an average environment where people are learning things. But then in that environment, that environment is entangled with many very social learnings that have nothing to do with nature, that overlap into the data, leak into your learning, and therefore we can't, as a good scientific study should do, we can't isolate that variable anymore. And that's the problem.
Madan, one of the things that we didn't show, and we moved forward probably quite a bit, probably 25 minutes or 22 minutes into the video. But in the beginning, Justin Barrett himself talks about this problem, basically. And he says, and he assumes, basically, he says that one of the best studies that could be done is to have children out in the jungle without any aid, and then see if this study really works, basically, if they come out with those kind of beliefs in an agency, basically. And he just assumes and says that yes, they would. I think they would. I mean, that's it. I'm quoting him, basically. And that's such a stretch. That's such a stretch, basically.
Yeah, I think they would as well, even in those conditions, simply because you learn about the fact that you make things. A human being of a 3-year-old eventually will learn that he makes certain stuff, and he will eventually, from that learning, from that learned experience.
Totally. Even in the
right. It's a design argument, in other words. It's like the watchmaker argument.
Even in a jungle, you see that babies are made by parents, basically. I mean, the babies are born to mothers, basically, and that's kind of in a sense design, basically, made by the mother.
Exactly.
Basically.
It's going to be very, very
and you
hard.
See that thing, the trees, the trees are made, or the fruits are made by the trees, basically. That's again the design argument, in a sense, basically. So you see that things are getting designed, basically, and I'm saying quote unquote design, basically, in the sense.
Yeah, I mean, the idea that fruits are designed by the trees would be against that, in the sense that it's not designed by a person. Remember, we're trying to We're trying
I agree. I faltered a bit. I faltered a bit there, basically.
My point is that a child will have lots of examples of sentience creating design things, complex things.
Exactly.
Or, therefore, the child is already biased with that social learning. And henceforth, when he gazes upon at the stars, when he looks at a monkey, when he looks at a tree, when he looks at a tiger and says, this must too also have a sentient creator. Exactly. Be it polydesign, polytheism, be it like a supernatural alien, be it like a person, be it like a human being, because some of these studies, in fact, show that kids infer human beings created stars. Some of them, not all of them. Some of them show, for example, human beings created the stars, the galaxies, the trees. Because again, he learns it. So this, in fact, strengthens what I'm trying to say, that it's a learned thing. Because why would a child look at a star or a cow and think, a human being designed it? Unless he learned it from the fact that human beings design things, right?
Exactly.
But the example that I give is stronger than the forest example, because the forest example still is subject to the social learning processes.
It's still subject to the environment around.
Because you're going to
probably the closet
is better.
Is much better. Totally.
And closet is a lot better. So I would suspect Barrett is correct to say that a feral child born in the jungle will still possibly think this, but it's still not the best scientific evidence for this particular question, because it's still enmeshed in a web of multiple variables that we are still not controlling. But in which the closet example we can control for, although highly unethical. Highly unethical.
Exactly.
And not recommended at all.
Right. Totally. I think he says the same thing for the jungle experiment. Forget about the closet experiment, right? I mean, yes, closet experiment would be like highly unethical, pretty much. All right, let's move on then.
Inclinations, that there is some purpose there, whatever that might be right.
That's right. That's right. They've got the sense that they've got a purpose, and asked the right way, young children will also show that, and they think that's why tigers are here. It's not just that they have a purpose; that's why they came about. So rivers are here so that people have a place to go fishing, or tigers are here so that there's something to see in the zoo. Like, well, that doesn't. I mean, we would say as adults those are crazy ideas, but the point she makes, and she's done these with adults too in some really clever experiments, where you have to get adults to answer very quickly, and sort of unfiltered under what we call cognitive load conditions. You get science-educated adults making similar kinds of errors, if you want to call them that, but to suddenly revert to very teleological or purpose and function-based kinds of explanations, or even intentional explanations. Someone made the tiger like this. Someone made the mountains like this. And from a very young age, children are perfectly clear that humans can't do this. 3-4-year-olds. And it's been done in many different countries. No, they know humans can't do this stuff. So it requires a special kind of someone who intended the purpose, the design of things in the natural world. That's so it seems that Kellerman has argued, and I've examining her evidence, I agree. The evidence seems to suggest that children have a natural propensity. We all, I should put it that way, we all, but from childhood, have a natural propensity to see design and purpose in the world around us, and understand that not all of that is coming from human beings. But we think it comes from someone or someone's. It could be multiple someones, I guess, in principle.
Can you just pause it? Yeah, it's so the psychologist's name is Kellerman, and I'm thinking about Kahneman. Kahneman with the N, K-E-N is Daniel Kahneman.
That's Deborah. This is Deborah Kellerman. K-E-L-E-M-E-N.
So that I think they're two different. They're not related to one another. I thought it may be his wife or something though.
No. This is Deborah Kellerman. She's in, I think, Boston University or something like that. Okay, shall we move on?
Yeah, I mean, everything is said here is already something that we covered, and I don't think this is a good enough study to actually isolate enough of the variables to ensure that we can say it's natural. It tells you that, of course, the study tells you that at those particular ages, children are more likely to say X, Y, Z instead of A, B, C. True, right? But it doesn't tell you the more interesting thing that they're trying to make is the more interesting conclusion that they're trying to make, which is that this is a natural belief. It doesn't tell you that.
Right. And as soon as the baby is born, he or she is surrounded by all the all these ideas where design is pretty apparent. Basically, it's the food or anything around them, pretty much, right? You know, making the bed, somebody makes your bed agency, somebody makes your food, somebody cleans your, you know, utensils and all those things. So there's design everywhere, even if subconsciously they're absorbing all this information. So that maturation naturalism is like pretty apparent over there in a sense, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, some people maybe think we're nitpicking, but let me just say that we're not nitpicking, given the gravity, the grandness of the claim, right, and the profusion and commonality of design beliefs that get propelled and transmitted within our society, right? Given the profusion of designer-like beliefs that we have throughout our society, you know, that was one of the first things that we learned, that human agents create things, that agency create things. Mom and dad creates the breakfast. Mom and dad has a purpose. Mom and dad has created this Y and Z. This television was created by a man. This sofa was created by a man. The wallpaper man created this. People built the home. You know, the car. You know, I want to become an engineer when I grow up and make things. Lego, playing with Lego. Given that it's so, what's the word? Is it so ubiquitous? Right? Is that the word? It's so
ubiquitous.
Ubiquitous. Yeah, you're teaching me English now. No, ubiquitous. It's so common, right, that we do need a stronger study. You know, and in order to control for extraordinary, we need to make an extraordinary conclusion in this situation, which is that despite all of these, designer beliefs floating around in our society, we have ensured that this particular conclusion, when we look at the stars and we say a sentient mind created the star, that is coming out of nowhere other than our innate intuitions, right? So given the abundance of design beliefs circulating our society, the higher the burden the study has, unfortunately.
Right. And there's no wonder that even when you are taking your subjects as 2 years or 3 years olds, they still have that sense, not innate, basically innate is the wrong word, but kind of they have matured enough naturalistically to get that sense of innateness, basically, right?
Yeah, but by three years old, most children can count between 1 and 5.
Exactly.
Is that innate necessarily? I mean, did they just, without learning, just observe this? Of course not. Some people would say there is a sense of mathematical sort of naturalism. We'll talk about in a minute that almost every single belief can be described as natural in a minute. That was another point that we made in our last video, where we said everything ultimately can be described as that based on how you define things. But we'll talk about that in a minute. We know children, for example, young children at the age of 3, they're extensively socialized, right? In fact, neonates around the age of 8 months to 2 years, they've not learned how to talk. They've not learned how to write or read. Yes, but for example, a number of studies on this. If you, for example, put up a display with number of farm animals, cows, chickens, goats, and you mention chicken, the baby who can't speak, who can't read, would look at that animal and stare at it a bit longer, giving psychologists an indication through this observation that the baby has been able to learn from its environment what these sounds mean, right? Because they look at the particular animal, right? And of course, nobody's going to look at that and go that belief in knowing what a chicken is from the sound chicken was innate. No, right? It wasn't.
Exactly.
It wasn't, because so even if we're doing that for a little baby who can't speak and read and write, then we should all the more do that for a 3-year-old who's already going to elementary school, nursery, etc., and it can speak and everything. Yeah.
True. All right, let's move on. I'm not quite sure whether I think we still have quite a few minutes left in this conversation, but you've already responded to everything here. let's see.
And that's just one of the factors that would then make us receptive to the idea of God. There are others.
So there was one more study, like, I think which you reference sometimes, which is that they did some experiment with children where they were showing how, I think it was a game or something where they created an agent like a smiley or something, and when that goes into the box, and when order is there, it's very natural for them to understand that agents create order, and it's very surprising for them that chaos can create order, something like that, right? Am I correct?
You are correct. Now I'm going to have to remember now whose work is this, George. You're right. What they showed is that even in infants, so babies who aren't even really talking much yet, already have the expectation that if something is an agent, and all you have to do in these infant studies is put a smiley face on a ball and make it sort of move on a computer screen in a weird kind of way, and then it activates the circuitry in our brains that says, that's not just an ordinary object. That is an agent. That is a minded thing doing stuff. Well, if it's a minded thing doing stuff, they understand that it can create order or disorder, right? Big sister can walk into the room and destroy things, but big sister can also walk into the room and tidy things up and put them in order. And the way we do these studies with really little kids is different kinds of looking designs, where you put a kid in front of a screen and have them look at something until,
I think, Madan, we already responded to this point. Basically, they have, they still have their senses working, all of their senses, even if they are infants. There's all 5 senses are working properly. And they can, they can intake all this information, internalize, and come to whatever conclusions. Basically, they are, as we have already used that term, maturing naturally, pretty much, in a sense. And it is hard for me to say, or hard for these guys to say, that this is not the maturational naturalism, but instead it's been an innate predisposition for them to find that order, and not that they have learned. So I still see that they are not making a point. We have already kind of given a point against their case here.
Yeah, exactly. So every single study that isn't able to isolate the social learning component and distinguish it from that it's innate will have that flaw. Now, guess what? I fully understand that most natural things will have a component that is social, right? And there's a social or environmental aspect to it, right? Even height. You have genes for height. You have a multiplicity of genes for height, but you need a environment in which for it to manifest, right? In order to reach, for example, 6'1" tall, if you are born in a very scarce and impoverished environment with poor diet and poor nutrition, you may not reach a maximum potential height that is set by the parameters of your genetics. So there's an interaction between genes and environment, right? And we know that because of several studies isolating that aspect. We know that given the fact that your genetics. It's also very improbable that height is something that you reach through learning, right? Social learning, it's not something that you memorize and understand. It's something that is triggered by your growth hormones and other microbiological events inside of you. The problem with socializing, something unlike height, something like beliefs and values and preferences and attitudes, there is a strong possibility that is contaminated by what you learn, right? So we're not debunking the idea. We're not naive to thinking that beliefs, when we say something's going to be natural, that it has to just be 100% natural. We understand there's going to be some sort of interaction between, social cues or environmental cues that will bring out a belief more likely than other beliefs. Yeah, but the point is the epistemological issues, the scientific issues with these studies prevent us from even determining that, because every single one of these studies are contaminated with the problem with not being able to genuinely isolate the social learning aspect from the natural aspect. How do we know it is a natural thing? How do we not know it's just entirely social? We can't do it for this. So even when it says about this thing about children thinking that disorder can't produce order, right? Again, that's a very kind of intuitive thing that you can learn when you're young. And another problem that I would say that is wrong with this kind of natural hypothesis is that why are we just limiting it to what happens naturally or what happens when you're young, right? A child's mind is too naive to be able to interrogate with particularly because they're not equipped with higher level data and information to keep check and assess and criticize certain naive beliefs he may form from the environment at that age. He may learn, for example, disorder can't produce order, but we know award-winning PhDs, physicists, biologists know disorder can produce order, right? Or order can,
or there can be order within disorder as well, you know,
yes,
those kind of things, pretty much, right?
Exactly. Yeah, and similarly, you know, the theory of special relativity or relativity of time, these things, or the fact that Newtonian time isn't correct, these things are counterintuitive and very, very intuitive to a child's mind. But I just want to be careful here. Because it's intuitive to a child's mind doesn't mean it's natural to a child's mind, because that still requires us to distinguish between nature versus nurture. My point is, the beliefs that a child will hold at that time, right, from what he learns from his education and by his limitations of his cortex to be able to understand other stuff, means that he's going to hold that belief, right, that order can't come from disorder. But why are we limiting it to that point? What about the 25-year-old with a fully developed cortex? Would it be natural to him to use his cortex to then assess these things and go, wait a minute, I'm more persuaded by Darwin, I'm more persuaded by Einstein that Newton was wrong. You know, absolute time everywhere and every place is not right. Relativity makes more sense, not intuitively, but in terms of facts, right? And in both cases, these can be socially learned, right? And you know, but the point, what I'm trying to say is trying to reveal an inherent hypocrisy here. Because if you want to just call that one natural when you're young, why aren't you calling the elder one, the older version of yourself when you're 25 and you learn these things? Why isn't that natural either? Because that's also something that you learn based on your cortex. So are we limiting the word natural to what impulsively and reflexively we conclude when we're like before the age of 7?
I think they'd probably respond with, then at the age 25, your behavior is being changed from what it intuitively, it's from its intuitions to a learned behavior, basically, right? And so that their objection would be something similar to, you know, saying, and probably they do say that this behavior probably is common, that God belief behavior is probably common in children. But when you go to atheistic societies like, you know, China, or probably, you know, take your pick, any other society, Iceland or some other place, they kind of indoctrinate against that intuition into more kind of non-religious beliefs, kind of. And so you can't trust those intuitions that develop, or the natural behavior that develop later on, pretty much. That's what I would assume their argument would be against it.
Yeah, but what I want to say is that if you're in an environment, so because they've not properly delineated between what's natural and what's learned, because these studies are empowered enough to do that, they're just assuming, for example, if it happens to be a belief that commonly occurs in a particular environment, then it's natural. And if that's the standard, that is the criterion, then what about the things that commonly occur when you're 25 and you're living in a society full of books and literature that you can read? You know, why is one not considered natural? And that's what I'm going to say. Why is one considered natural? When
I think the problem is the delineation between the natural and this acquired kind of a thing, basically, or a learned thing, basically, I think.
And so they may want to say that when you're young, you're more inclined to be more of the noble savage who doesn't know anything, right? And when you're older, but the point is, given these studies don't effectively demarcate between nature and nurture, they're just taking what is common in a average society. You know, children believe in order can't come from disorder. You know, but given that they've not delineated and demarcated between what is actually natural versus what is actually socially learned, we have the same. We can just simply say the same thing about, it's arbitrary, basically. We can say the same thing about teenagers and elders who, more elderly people who went to university, and then they themselves, for example, came to the conclusion that Einstein was correct and Newton was wrong, for example, or that order can arise from disorder, etc.
Right. All right. Let's move on. I think we have plenty of stuff still.
And build up an expectation, and then you show them something else and see if it recovers their attention. And if it does, they're seeing something surprising. Or you can put things side by side and look at which one do they pay attention to. There are lots of different modifications that you can do on this. But in their study, what they found was when there was what's called an occluder, a barrier in the way of whatever the stuff is that's going to be ordered or disordered. If an agent goes behind there and then the screen drops and suddenly there's order out of chaos, they kind of go, yeah, saw that coming, but in the infant sort of way. It doesn't recover their attention. They're not terribly interested or surprised. But if it wasn't an agent that went behind there, if it was a ball or something like that, just a regular round object, and suddenly there's order, they're like, whoa, wait a minute, show me that again. I did not see that coming. Right? It recovers their attention. And so that difference in response then led the Yale researchers to infer, George Newman, that's it, George Newman, Frank Kyle, and others. It led them to the inference of, even very early in life, preschoolers, infants, have the expectation that agents bring about order or disorder, but you got to have an agent. Non-agents can't order things. Right. So I'm glad you bring that up, because it's yet more evidence that we have this expectation that when we see design and order in the natural world, which we seem to do, we have this expectation that, in someone, an intentional being brought that about. We don't just think, dumb luck. Go ahead.
So if I'm not wrong, there's one of the biggest studies that has ever been conducted, and you were a part of that study also, which was across many countries, and that also.
Okay, Madhin, just one point here about these studies, and maybe there's, and I'm a little skeptical about the methodology here in assessing the responses of these infants, basically, right? As to how they assess, and probably there is a proper, it's rock solid in terms of the behavioral study. But I'm a little skeptical as to how do you read their response, whether they think that they expected this, but they got this, or the vice versa, pretty much, right? So what do you think about those studies? Do you think those studies are like rock solid in, in expressing the behavior or the responses of these infants? I'm not quite sure about that, to be honest.
What were the studies exactly again?
So that's what he talked about, right? I mean, they showed some smiley face, right? And there is some a screen behind which there are some, deceival bars, basically, right? And then the smiley moves behind this screen, and then an order appears between those bars, basically deceival bars, basically, right? So these are Lego bars, you can say, right? Whatever bars these are, right? And so they show a response as to they are bored, basically, because they expected this, so they show an expression of boringness, basically, maybe yawning or something, right? But when the smiley face is not there, basically it's just a ball kind of thing, which symbolizes basically a non-agent, and that goes behind this evil Lego bars behind the screen, and the screen is removed all of a sudden, and there's this what do you call order?
Yeah,
they express surprise, basically.
Yeah. I think the studies are perfectly fine depending on what context you're talking about it. This is for me evidence for the fact that children learn these things, and further, when they see an aberration or a departure from their common reality, there is a surprise, an astonishment, and a sense of amazement or shock or even grief that happens. Absolutely. We see this with animals as well. For example, non-human animals as well. For example, you can take a chimpanzee and perform a magic trick. You can, let's say, for example, make something float or make something disappear in your hands, or even a card trick, right? Where you turn the Queen of Hearts into the King of Spades, right? The chimp is shocked. The chimpanzee is shocked. He even displays signs of laughter, or
right, true that.
Right. Now, does that mean he thinks, for example, that the Queen of Hearts was, cannot never change into a spades through nature? Not necessarily. He just could have just learned it through repetitious order learning, learnings about how things work, right? It's still going to be a social aspect to it, right? It's not necessarily nature per se.
True that. True.
Right. So maybe with, for example, chimps, though, you could make a stronger case that it was nature, because but even there, because they still learn things. For example, birds who have not been exposed to certain things, they don't fly as well as birds, or hunt as well as birds who have been exposed to certain things. Right? And they get domesticated and they don't work well in nature. So there's an element of environmental learning that you need for animals as well. So we can't, even with that animal experiment with the chimpanzee, it doesn't help us know, for example, whether or not it was nature more than nurture, right? All we can say by that, whether it's nature or nurture, the chimp is accustomed to the fact of some sort of mind-independent order, stability of that order. That gravity works or something. They kind of know that you drop an object, it falls to the ground, and when an experience comes along that contradicts that, they're shocked.
Exactly. Yeah. True that. So yeah, in a sense, we can trust these studies in terms of the response, but still the gap still remains as to how you can say whether it's nature versus it's nurture, basically, right? Absolutely. So the gap is still there, I think. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. The same for children as well. I'm pretty sure they are. It tells you, for example, these things were common to it, and it understood it as being consistent and reliably uniform. Maybe some sort of knowledge of a very primitive, non-verbal knowledge of some sort of natural law, right? But did it learn about this natural law and stability through its innate disposition, or is it something that was it just already ingrained in it, or did it learn about it from the environment? And I'm just telling you, it's the same objection that I mentioned. They could have just learned that mommy and daddy make coffee. Coffee just doesn't come out of thin air. Mommy and daddy people make TV, right? And that's all.
Their environment is filled with agency creating order, or even disorder, basically, from order to disorder or disorder to order, basically. So they see that change with agency all the time, pretty much.
Yes, exactly. And these are old enough kids to be able to kind of recognize that. But I would imagine, we don't know exactly that extent that children are able to engage in these fantasies and fictions. And furthermore, to the extent that they are able to distinguish that this is a fantasy and a fiction that I'm just role-playing in right now. Children obviously watch like Disney movies and see like broomsticks moving around on their own, etc. Does that, for example, necessarily tell them that broomsticks can move around, etc.? I think some of them may end up thinking like that, but others might be able to tell that it's a fantasy, it's a cartoon, it's not real. It's that most broomsticks don't do that. If a broomstick does do that, it's a very shocking broomstick. Some of them may in fact think there are broomsticks out there, for example, which can fly around on their own, but it's just very rare. When I was a kid, I remember thinking that there might be stuff like flying carpets, but I also knew that most carpets didn't fly. Right.
Right.
So if I saw a carpet, I'll still be probably shocked. Right, but that wouldn't be evidence of the fact that I ruled out the fact that there couldn't be a flying carpet. That would be evidence of the fact that I'm just shocked. So it depends on how deep you want to get to the studies and see how deep you want to get into the studies. How much of the child's mind does it really tell us about?
Right. What can you read about the mentality of those infants in study, pretty much, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
All right. Let's move on.
Came to the same conclusion in 2011 or 12, if I'm not wrong.
I'm not sure which one you're referencing, but there have been a number of these studies. I don't think I was an author on a really big multinational being brought that about. We don't just think, oh, dumb luck. Go ahead.
So if I'm not wrong, there's one of the biggest studies that has ever been conducted, and you were a part of that study also, which was across many countries, and that also came to the same conclusion in 2011 or 12, if I'm not wrong.
I'm not sure which one you're referencing, but there have been a number of these studies. I don't think I was an author on a really big multinational of this type, but some of my students have been involved with these.
Okay. And there's one more by Oliviera, Petrovic. It's not so big, but there is one more, right?
Yeah, Oliviera Petrovic at Oxford, she replicated a number of studies that Jean Piaget did way back when, looking at how children understand the creation of things like the moon and mountains and animals and things. And she's the one who has, among others, but she uncovered pretty convincing evidence that even preschool children are fully aware that humans do not make mountains or lakes. 3-year-olds understand this, that it requires gods to do this sort of thing. And they expect that, even in a relatively secular kind of place like Oxford, England, where there are plenty of atheists around, maybe even majority atheists, and yet their children seem to expect that, no, it takes God to make things like mountains and moons, but people make buildings and clothing and things like that. So all of this research points in this direction that we've got this natural, Kellerman calls it teleofunctional reasoning, which is a mouthful, but basically the point is that we naturally see design and purpose in the world around us. Some of it is made by humans, so those are the artifacts, those are books, clothes, houses, but we also tend to think that plants and animals have purpose, function, and that someone intended that purpose and function, unless we were taught otherwise. So that's the interesting thing about some of Kellerman's later work, is suggesting that the default position is seeing design and purpose, but different educational programs, like for instance in atheistic China, mainland China, they're pretty good at training kids out of those intuitions and say, no, your intuitions about this are wrong. There isn't any design and purpose. Okay, so we tend to believe it unless we were taught otherwise. Now, what to make of?
I think one of the things he has already answered, which should be a suspect basically in this study, these studies, and coming to the conclusions or inferences that these guys are drawing, and that is that he himself said, Justin Barrett himself said, that these 3-year-old kids or 2-year-old kids have belief that cars are created by humans and all these things are, refrigerator is created by humans and all those things. And even, mountains are created by humans and all those things basically. But as you grow, you realize that those learned behaviors or those inferences that these kids draw about, creation or design, about mountains and all those things are false basically, right? Trees. So why not this intuition as a whole could be false pretty much, right? Why only just take some part of it and then say, oh, okay, those intuitions that they discarded were obviously false because, in a sense, they could say that when they say they were designed by humans is what I'm saying. Basically, if they thought that the mountains were designed by humans, that is something that they discarded, not something saying, not that I'm saying that they had this intuition that these were designed by a higher agent, right?
Yeah, exactly. So they're being selective here because some of the studies actually showed that these children, for example, infer a designer to mountains and stars. Yes, cars and stuff have a designer, but so do mountains and stuff. And guess what they thought was the designer? Human beings. They thought human beings created the sun. Human beings created. And my point is, this is quite telling that they, as you kind of mentioned, and I kind of get the impression this is what you're trying to say as well, that why didn't they just think this was the natural belief? And they're being arbitrary. They're kind of using a special pleading to go. So for example, let me just give an example. They're thinking that it required forced learning by China to remove them of the intuition that a designer exists behind stars. But wait a minute, why didn't they apply the same logic to the study that showed, for example, they infer there's a designer, but it's not a human? The study that showed that they infer a designer, but it was a human, could be the natural one. And maybe they actively kind of confuse themselves, actively brainwash themselves off their natural feelings, and then remove the human part, and then added more stuff to it. Why isn't that one natural? Can you see the arbitrariness of this? So it's kind of selective of what they're selecting to be the real natural thing, and everything else to be an aberration from nature, right? Maybe the aberration from nature is the study where they thought, okay, stars come from designers as well, and that designer is not a human, but some sort of supernatural entity. Maybe that's the natural one, and maybe the natural one is the one where the children look at the objects, the stars, the moons, the mountains, and go, "There's a human being. My dad created this. My mom created it." Exactly. It's just double standards here, and we don't know how they kind of got to this point. What method they used just go, oh, no, this is really natural, and the other one is not natural. It's a joke.
Right. All right, let's move on then. Just a small point. I thought, I mean, we should have clarified to the audience.
Of that philosophically is another issue.
So you said, so one quote that I have, like, from you say the playing field is tilted towards religious beliefs and practices, and you need cultural correlates to inhibit, not to teach, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would want to nuance that, but that's a really good summary of the idea. Is and I'm pushing it back against this idea that some thinkers have tried to popularize over the last 20 years that, oh, the reason that people are religious is because of this routinized, heavy indoctrination. Right, that it's because their parents sort of force them to believe and even threaten them with, punishment if they don't believe in all of this. And those of us working in cognitive science of religion, I think most of us at this point say, well, that's not what the evidence suggests. The evidence suggests that it's really easy for kids to adopt at least many religious beliefs, not all. They're fancy theological beliefs that are kind of hard for all of us. But the basic idea that there is at least one God and maybe there are spirits of various sorts, and that there's something that about us that might exist beyond death, that's separable from our physical bodies. That seems to be a very natural and intuitive thing for children. Those kinds of beliefs are the conceptual path of least resistance. So the playing field is tilted in their direction, and what it requires is.
I think he's equivocating on the word of force here. So when people say that you're forced to be indoctrinated into a particular religious belief, it's very similar to saying that you're forced to be indoctrinated into learning something, forced to undergo a kind of educational regime that discarded, let's say, mathematics, right? So we're not saying that, for example, one is not easier. The false one is not easier than the true one, right? Imagine we don't teach children mathematics, right? Is mathematics at least like a little bit more complicated math, a bit more complicated than what a kid can learn? Of course it is. Is there a force involved? Is there a kind of artificialness? Of course there are. You got to learn about subtraction and fractions and ratios, and then when you're like percentages and maybe basic algebra, and these things are not necessarily completely intuitive, right? But when somebody says that you were forced, when we say that you mistreated your child or there was negligence involved, it kind of has these kind of stigmas associated. We mean that you neglected to teach them the true discipline of mathematics. Like if you go to like some area of America right now in the South, and we learn that a child was never sent to school and he never learned mathematics, we say you forced this child not to undergo this. You forced them into this other stuff. We're not saying that the other stuff is not easy to understand. Of course, it might be. But it's the reason why we say force is that we deprived them of it. And that's what I think, that's an equivocation that he's making, that when people say that you were indoctrinated or forced, it means that you were not all given the opportunity to learn the other stuff. That's what we mean by force. Not that not that the truth is easier to learn than the falsities. We never mentioned, I don't think we ever said that. Did we actually say that the truth was easier to learn than the falsities? Does any scientist or atheist believe that?
No, I don't think so. Yeah. That's an equivocation, right?
Yeah, I think I think most atheists, even like people like Christopher Hitchens, who are not a psychologist, would have said has been actually saying that it's easier to learn these things. It is. It's easier to learn these things. Religion is very simple and commonsensical. Like we see people create things, and therefore we think this has a creator. It's a very easy one, commonsensical, intuitive. With pattern-seeking animals, I think most even Dawkins would say that it actually is easy to anthropomorphization is far easier than the complexities of physics.
Exactly.
Right? Of course, this is one of the big things that we say about that most atheists in the mainstream talk about. It's easier, right? By force, we mean that he's equivocating on the word force. By force, we mean that the person was indoctrinated in the sense that they were prevented from learning the other stuff, the science, the mathematics, prevented from learning about evolution. Let's say somebody was indoctrinated into creationism, and which is easier. I think most people would think it is easier than learning about something like evolution, right? And so he's equivocating on that word by thinking when he says when we say that it's forced, that we mean the truth is easier, and that the religious beliefs are harder to learn. No, we never said that. What's he talking about?
Yeah. Right. Okay, let's move on.
special cultural conditions, education, indoctrination, if you will, to discourage that kind of thinking. So it really requires some kind of totalitarian state like the Chinese government, who's invested in people not believing in God, to really work hard to persuade people not to believe in God. And then they pull it off. Just a fun little footnote on this. One of the most atheistic countries in the world by number of people believing in God, proportionately, is Iceland. It's drifting up there in the North Atlantic. But they have at least last I checked, it may be changing, but a very high rate of belief in these sort of nature spirit kind of beings they call the hidden people. Like at least 10 years ago, it was a majority of their population. So it's not.
I think, Martin, we can skip forward this example, right? I think we can move on to the next topic, basically.
Yeah, before you do that, I just want to say that you don't need a strict totalitarian regime. You just need open access to a number of different ideas. And with the natural development of the human brain and the lack of one-sided indoctrination and exposure to liberal ideas and so on, with a free and open mind, I submit that you would not get strong and entrenched superstitious beliefs. You will get more critical minds, because even the curriculum in, for example, Sweden and Denmark, they're not necessarily forcing you, for example, like China, right? Yet people are tending
even Martin, let's say, consider countries like Iran, right, where some of the research says that almost 60% of the population is moving towards non-religion, basically. So even if they can come out of it, they are not being indoctrinated against their own religion. They have come out of it on their own, pretty much, basically, thinking through it, basically, right? At least that's how I would think about it. I may be wrong about it, but and same is true with Japan, all these other countries. Yeah. So I think this is like really constrained thinking. This is really myopic thinking, I think, on Justin Barrett's part, basically.
Like I said, based on all of the objections that we already said, the early learnings of these sort of design, let's call it design myths, design theories, have urges, design instinct is not really an instinct by nature. It could just be something that is learnt. In fact, the evidence suggests that we can't remove that as the option off the table. But yeah, and if that's the case, the reason why some people still persist at an adult age with those myths is because they formed it when they were young, built on top of naive kind of attitudes, but ultimately were still learned.
No, I think Madan, can I just stop you for a second? I think indoctrination is the other way around. When these kids are developing with these kind of ideas, the indoctrination happens from more of the religious societies, basically, and they pound these ideas into their heads, and then they can't come out of it. It's I think the very other way around, pretty much, because once these ideas are instilled so deep into their psyche, they just can't get it out of their heads, pretty much, right? And that's what you see in very highly religious societies, because no matter what you do, you just can't make them think critically in terms of evidence produced in certain of these ideas, pretty much.
Yeah, let me just say, Justin Barrett also in his book says, although these sort of primitive kind of, he thinks, for example, these primitive attitudes towards design, supernatural things, or agents, or purpose, or morality, is a kind of initial rudimentary ingredients that steers us towards the natural, having a natural affinity towards religion. He says theology, however, isn't very natural. Theology is built on top of maybe those natural instincts, but theology requires sophisticated thinking, requires learning things, right? The concept, he himself says in his book, read the book, Born Believers. He says it explicitly that theological concepts like a omnipotent, omnipresent, omnibenevolent God, or Jesus being resurrected, or abstract immaterial minds, or a timeless being, these are very, very difficult and counterintuitive concepts. And it doesn't come very natural. Those particular ones. He says this clearly, and which is a mark of intellectual honesty, I would imagine, right? He says that part doesn't come very naturally. The idea of a timeless causation or time, these things that require theological learnings, and maybe something that we kind of absorb in you know, and it's very counterintuitive. And furthermore, you don't have that from a young age. There's no child just walking around thinking about immaterial minds that created the universe timelessly, and he was monotheistic. These things, you know, there's a single creator that was all powerful and infinite. You have to learn from some sort of scripture and some sort of society that teaches you. And Barrett says there's no evidence at all in his studies that show that these things exist since young. So therefore, the concept of a fitrah, is antithetical to what it really means, which is that you're born inherently believing in the Islamic proposition of a single monotheistic God, and that there's no evidence of that at all.
Right. And Madan, one more thing that occurred to me is that even if, let's say, for the sake of argument, it's assumed that these kids are born with whatever the kind of belief in a single agency or multiple agencies kind of belief that they are born with, and with an innate predisposition to believe that, it still leads you to believing in a deistic kind of a God, pretty much, right? It doesn't take you to theistic God, pretty much. And all the while, Justin has been, at least proposing that they have a theistic belief, which is, I think, in my assessment, that's what you call a skullduggery, pretty much, right? And that's dishonest, I think, because that is not theistic. Even if you assume for an agency, as you just mentioned, they don't have any idea about all powerfulness. They don't have any idea about, all knowingness or all mercifulness and all those things. They just have a belief, and whatever these studies, if they do show that and assume to be true, basically having an innate kind of a predisposition, they would only lead you to a deistic kind of a creator, pretty much.
Yes, yeah, no, absolutely, a deistic type of creator, which is, there's no reason to think that the being has interacted with humanity, and I don't think any of them think that from a young age. I don't think there's any study, but even if they did, it would just require a little bit of a study. I'm pretty sure you can easily acquire something like that, given the looseness of these studies already, of people enmeshed in an environment where there's so many influences influencing them, right? I don't think it'll be hard to find a study, for example, where you can get a child to say, maybe through some prompting, that, yeah, maybe the creator, likes us. And then we can interpret that likes us to mean he must be involved like an interventionist. Right? Can you see how the lousiness, the timidness of these studies, how weak they are, and how they kind of interpret and extrapolate from tiny sentences? I think the Oliviera Petrovic one, or I think it was Petrovic one, was similar to that, in the sense that they kind of prompted the children to answer in a particular way, given the options that they laid on the table, right? Where not knowing something was not an option, they had to answer, right? Like who created the trees, or who's created nature? And they actually gave an option where God was there.
Yeah, the loaded questions, basically, in a sense.
Yeah. Why didn't you give a myriad of other options? Why don't you give a myriad of many different options and then see? This is what I'm saying. So they kind of prompt the studies are not the greatest in that respect.
Yeah, that's why I was saying, I think this is the objection where we raised, that there are some methodological problems within these studies, pretty much. So yeah. Anyways, I think we should move on. Madan, what do you say? Shall we? We are almost 1 hour 18 minutes into the stream. Shall we take up callers? I don't think there's anybody gonna join. So maybe we can, because we still have 4 more points to cover. We have only covered 1 point. So maybe we can cover the
1 or 2 more points. Yeah, 1 or 2 more points. So let's
We'll skip over to the cognitive errors, basically.
Yes, go for it. No. Go for it. Yeah.
Okay. All right. We have already moved to the cognitive errors. This is an objection, basically. Let's see what they have to say.
These evolutionary accounts, I guess, that would go somewhere along the lines of, well, maybe it's the case that this teleofunctional reasoning, or this thinking about design and purpose in the natural world, is an example of one of these belief-forming faculties that is misfiring, that is being used in the wrong context. Okay, and so by Plantinga's own argument, it's leading to beliefs that do not have high positive epistemic status. Because what's the mechanism for? What did it evolve to solve? Maybe you're using it out of that context when you're thinking you see design behind human minds, for instance, and behind our beliefs. Okay, so that's a more interesting argument. I think that's a more interesting kind of counter argument. Does that one make sense?
Yeah.
You see what I'm getting at there? Now, I do have kind of a response to that, but I want to make sure that we've got that one. So the idea is, right, back to Plantinga's original assertion, which is that, yeah.
So yeah, go ahead. Yes. So now the objection is maybe this is a misfiring of our cognitive system.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
so,
or it's working in the wrong context. It's solving the wrong problem.
Right.
It would be a little bit like saying, okay, there's a button factory that makes buttons, but you've used it to make, I don't know, pencils. Well, you can't expect that it's going to make good pencils. It's a button factory after all.
Right.
Or the button factory works perfectly fine when you put, when you use plastics, but not if you use wood to, as your materials. Then it doesn't work so well. And you're using it to, you're putting wood into it and trying to make buttons. It might be analogous to that. Does that make sense?
So a very simple response, what comes to my head would be, we haven't demonstrated that is that is a misfiring. We're just assuming that it's a misfiring. Am I correct?
Right. That's correct. And we'll come back to that one, but you're absolutely right. That's an assumption that's sort of built in. And partly it's because, frankly, we don't know, with assuming that this is an evolved belief-forming faculty, if you want to call it that. Okay, let's grant that, and let's assume that it evolved for particular purposes. We don't know what those purposes are. And there are a couple of really reasonable candidates out there. One of those is that it evolved in the context of tool making, right? Because humans make things, and it's to be a good tool user or to modify tools, it's important to be able to very quickly pick up on what's it for. That might have been really handy. And so maybe it's a late evolving kind of thing, late, meaning after tools start becoming important to us as a species. Okay, maybe that's right. But it could be the case that it evolved just before that and actually helped us start making tools. So we looked around the natural world and we saw things like, tiger's claws, since we've been talking a lot about tigers, we'll keep going. Tiger's claws are really good at scratching things and tearing and ripping because of the particular shape. So if I find a stone that has that shape, maybe I can use that to tear, and because it has similar structure, it must have similar function or purpose. So now my teleofunctional reasoning actually helps me invent tools, but its proper domain of application is actually in the natural world. So maybe actually the mechanism evolved precisely to reason about things in the natural world. And so these aren't misfires at all. Now, we just don't know. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. We don't know. It's a not very strong objection if you don't know. You're just making it up, right? You don't have evidence one way or the other. And to make things even more complicated, when it comes to evolved faculties, we know that many of our faculties evolve for one thing and then they get used for something else later. It's in the jargon of evolution, it's called exaptation. So it evolves for one thing and suddenly it's being used for something else. But if it gets used for that other thing long enough, then the winnowing effect of natural selection, well, it's had time to operate. So why wouldn't we trust the deliverances of that too? So maybe back to our button factory. If the button factory keeps making buttons out of plastic or wood sufficiently over time, even though it was only designed to use plastic and now it's using wood, but it does a pretty good job with it, then we trust it to make wooden buttons too. There's nothing wrong with that. And that seems to actually be how evolution, at least by theory, commonly works. So it's a not terribly strong objection in that respect, just because we can't pin it down. We don't know. But I love the point that you raised right off the bat, which is we don't know if it's operating in error. So I was emphasizing that is the system operating in the context it's supposed to? You emphasize, is it making mistakes? And the two are closely related, but they're good to tease apart, because here's where things get interesting. If I'm an atheist objector, I think, well, surely this thing is operating in error, right? It's telling people essentially someone designed tigers, and that's not right. Well, how do I know that's not right? Well, because I've already rejected the possibility that there's a god who designed tigers, or forest spirits, or whatever you like that designed the tigers. I've already rejected that. Well, that's called question begging in philosophy. Right. It's cheating.
Right.
But it does show that when you are the naturalist or the atheist in this space, you automatically.
I thought he was going to say something a lot more interesting there, and he didn't. Right. So, so far so good in the sense that he's correct to say, for example, that if there is something natural, right, he acknowledges the possibility that it might be a cognitive bias. There are plenty of innate cognitive biases. And in fact, many of these cognitive biases may have a vestigial function, meaning that in the past, in our historical evolutionary development, or in terms of ancestor species even, this kind of attitude or propensity that we may have had that's firmly entrenched in our biology that enables us to have this kind of personality may have had some sort of functional benefit in order to maybe survive, right? But now these attitudes, these beliefs that we may hold that might be biological in its foundation have become redundant. That's one possibility. Therefore, it's a cognitive bias because it leads us astray into error, intellectual error, right? It was fit for one environment, but it no longer is fit for these environments, right? Or it's a cognitive bias that just always been false. It's maybe like a byproduct of other forms of urges, etc. So one is a vestigial function, that is what is used to be valuable in one context-specific environment, and the second one being a byproduct, which means that it's a product of many other advantageous traits. It's not an adaptation. It's I think it's an expectation. I forgot what it's called, but it's a byproduct. I think it's called a spandle in the context of biology. Spandle. I'm not 100% sure. I can't remember now. It's been a long time since I've reviewed the literature. But meaning that one example is the angle of our chins is a byproduct of evolution. There's no advantage maybe of the angles of our chin to be in that particular angle. It's not an adaptation. It's a product of other adaptations. It's just it just happens to be the case that we have a chin like this, right? Maybe that's not the best example. Another example is the redness of blood, right? That's an evolutionary byproduct. It's not a vestigial trait as far as we know either, right? It's just the redness of blood is the result of iron in hemoglobin, right? And iron, for example, reflects light in that particular light spectrum frequency, and the reflection of light is a red emission, right? So our eyesight picks it up as red. Now, did the red blood cells, is the redness a adaptation? Is that an advantageous feature? Well, no. It's a byproduct of an advantageous feature, which is the iron in hemoglobin, so that it can be become a compound with oxygen and carry the oxygen around the body, human body. Oxygenated blood. You need oxygenated blood, so red blood cells are able to bond with oxygen and so on. And hemoglobin is a necessary component for that. But it's a byproduct of it, of the iron in hemoglobin, that the red blood cell is red. It doesn't have a function of any other function, advantageous biological function, right? So it could very well be that some cognitive biases are just byproducts like that. The byproducts of other stuff, right? Now, maybe I went too deep into that. I didn't have to do that. But what is Justin Barrett saying regarding that, right? He says that the idea that something is a cognitive bias is just a guess or assumption. You need to substantiate that it is, right? It might not be. It might be something that might, eventually in the future of biology become useful. Or we've just, assumed, for example, the beliefs are false. Like the atheist comes with this assumption that the cow is not designed, the dog is not designed, mountains are not designed. And that's just speculation. And what I'm going to say is, no, that's not just speculation. In fact, this is the meat of the point, right? Justin Barrett's studies does not, for example, show that these beliefs are reliable in a particular context. In a particular context in the debate between atheists. In a debate between atheists where the atheist has actual sound objections, positive reasons to think, for example, these are illusions, right? In that context, of course, for example, it's not just an assumption that I think the cow is not designed. I think the cow came from natural processes, right? Based on lots of evidence of evolution. The physicalist who believes in the world is purely physical, he has justifications for why the world is purely physical, right? So Barrett's study does have to wrestle with those contenders, right? He can't simply just think that the atheist is just assuming that these things don't have any function. We are providing positive reasons for it. Even if we didn't provide positive reasons for it, it's not good enough for him to simply say that the atheist has to show that it is actually in error and not picking up on something. He needs to show that it's not an error as well. At best, then he'll have agnosticism. And I know he's got other arguments to show that why the agnostic position is better preferred, because he backs it up with Plantinga and sensus divinitus. He's trying to show that it's some sort of axiom of thinking. We'll go into that when he gets to that. But at this moment, he's not said anything about those things. So he's left with agnosticism, meaning if there are certain natural beliefs, right, then it doesn't mean that that natural belief is true unless shown to be true, unless shown to be picking up on something that is correct and accurate, right? And if you have something against it to say that it's not accurate, right, then that will debunk it. The reason that we think let's say, remember, we've not conceded that these are natural. We're just hypothetically assuming for now in this part of his lecture that it is natural. But with the same grounds, we may think, for example, looking at the Earth is natural, thinking that the Earth is flat is natural, or absolute time, but Newtonian time is natural. Einstein's special relativity is highly unnatural, right? But if there's a defeater to that natural belief, then that will defeat that natural, what he says, the positive epistemic value of that natural belief. What would it be? What would be a defeater in the context of the absolute Newtonian time? Well, it'd be Einstein's relativity theories. Similarly, what would be a defeater to this design impulse that we have, this creator impulse that we have of this natural belief that there's a creator behind the cow? Evolutionary theory, physics, the arguments from naturalism, the arguments, yeah. So in the end, this does nothing for the knowledgeable atheist who would know. Look, there is a defeater. The defeater is all of these arguments. So you've not done anything by showing that it's natural. Yeah.
True that. Exactly. All right.
I think that faculty is more error prone, right? Because if it leads to religious beliefs that you've rejected, then yeah, it's making errors. But the person who believes in God and that God designed tigers, or God used evolution to design tigers, it doesn't matter, that there's God in the system somewhere. Well, that person doesn't think that it's making errors. That God could have given us this faculty that detects.
So sorry for talking extensively. I know I'm good, and I absolutely agree with this. Depending on your pre-theoretic, your other commitments, your other beliefs, you will interpret it differently. Absolutely agree with you. But that happens to be the case with everything. That happens to be the case with everything, right? And I've mentioned this point before. The way we kind of know something is a cognitive falsity is based on cognitive illusion, is based on other beliefs that we hold, right? The reason we think, for example, something is an optical illusion is because we know how our eyesight operates, right? In other contexts without that illusory effect, right? We can have an independent check on something and know that was an illusion, right? That's how we can tell that we suffer from certain optical illusions, because we have a theory of what involves a non-illusory belief, and we compare and contrast it to that and go, oh, this is actually a cognitive bias misleading us, leading us astray, leading us to irrational beliefs, right? So you need that. And if you didn't have that yardstick, we won't be able to tell it's a cognitive illusion. Absolutely 100% agree. And he's right to say that the theist will interpret it this way. But that would mean that the entire theism versus atheism debate resolves. If you think, for example, theism is true and all the arguments for theism are correct, then maybe you could say, for example, those are not cognitive deficiencies.
Biases, right?
Yeah, these are inbuilt intuitions that God has given us. Fine.
Right.
Fine. But remember, that doesn't do nothing for the atheist. And it doesn't do anything for any Muslim who wants to convince somebody else outside of their camp. But then if if the theist has the obligation now to show that we should interpret this not as a cognitive bias, what do they do? They need to go beyond talking about these natural feelings that we have and start substantiating the cosmological argument, the fine-tuning argument, the scriptural argument, prophecies. By that time, you've kind of rendered this line of argument redundant, the naturalness, right? In other words, the naturalness is just something that you interpret after you've proven theism or proven
Right.
atheism.
I mean, you still need to substantiate it with other arguments and
Yes.
not just take it as the standalone argument, pretty much. Right.
Exactly. So which shows exactly that this, therefore, this on its own is not enough. Yeah.
Right. Right. Okay. Move on.
Design and purpose accurately. And so it's not as error prone. So it's a more trustworthy faculty if you're a theist than if you're a non-theist, which is kind of interesting.
Right.
Because now you've got additional reasons for trusting it.
Yeah. So I have one point there, which is like some atheists would use something that we have, like, hyperactive agency detection device or theory of mind. And they might say that this is because we have this thing, and this is the reason we believe in God or anything. But this is problematic. Like, this is wrong. This is like misfiring, or this is flawed. If that is the case, we would of course ask for the criteria. Like, what is the criteria for us to judge if this is a mistake? Because in the end, for example, you have used this example, and I really like this example. That, if I'm talking to you right now, you seem to be a minded being because of, like, my theory of mind and hyperactive agency device. So if that is, like, if I don't have a criteria, I might just have to reject all agency that I see. But at least with you or with some other human beings, I find it to be very much reliable. So without, like, some people are like, no, but you are okay with believing in these people, but not your agency going beyond physical things. And that is where they're presupposing materialism in the mix.
Yeah, good. Well said. That's right. And it's one of the important bits that cognitive science of religion, at least most of us who work in the space, emphasize, is that the belief-forming faculties that we're talking about are widespread, right? Like we said at the very beginning, there's no God spot. There's no special circuitry just for God. There's teleological reasoning. There is theory of mind. There is, and you can keep adding. There are all of these more general, they're not super general, but they're a little more general kinds of mechanisms for forming beliefs that we use in what you might call religious context, but also outside of those in sort of more ordinary contexts. So theory of mind, yeah, I might use that for thinking about, what does God want from me? But I might use it for thinking about what you're thinking right now and whether we're understanding each other. So I'm using that theory of mind. And if you want to say that my theory of mind,
if you notice, he's saying all the things that we said in our first video, which is that these are just general kind of rudimentary blueprints towards certain kind of things, like a theory of mind or a design impulse. Then they kind of cobble them together and say that this makes us more conducive towards God. There's no specific God spot in the brain, right? Which I kind of find great that he says it like that, because it shows that we've interpreted him correctly and accurately and pinpointed it properly. Right. That's what we said as well. There is no pinpoint. There's no hardwired faculty of God in the brain, right?
Exactly.
It's just all these kind of different things. Kids believe in invisible childhood friends. Kids believe, a person created the mountain. Kids believe in minds exist beyond them. Kids believe in the stability of order. Kids believe that if you kill somebody, a teacher saying that murdering somebody is wrong, murdering somebody is right, doesn't make the teacher right. There's like some sort of absolute moral principle that
right.
So none of these things really have anything to do with God per se. They just cobble them together and go, it makes us more conducive towards religion, right? But it also makes you more conducive towards many other things, and not just a theistic religion. It could be a polytheistic religion. It could be anything else as well. And I acknowledge the fact that it creates a bit of an affinity, but it's not. Remember, our last stream was to show that we don't have a inbuilt Fitrah. It's astronomically away from that conclusion, right? Astronomically, light years away from the conclusion that
exactly.
we have. And that's all I wanted to establish. And it's good that Barrett says this. And but Barrett's point here is that acknowledging Khalid's point, which is that I think he tries to make a more deeply philosophical point that why don't we assume agency elsewhere? We accept it for people, and this is very stupid. I mean, do I need to point this out? And this is where Barrett's weaknesses come in, because Barrett's not a philosopher; he's a psychologist.
He's a psychologist, right?
Yeah, and his weakness, he doesn't seem to realize the reason that we infer human agency and agency of chickens is because we've got a lot of evidence, empirical evidence, direct and indirect, of human agency, right? The philosophy of mind gives us very good reasons to think, for example, there are other minds, right? We have strong arguments, inductive arguments, to infer that Philo has a mind. Kylie's not here, but Kylie has a mind. Justin Barrett has a mind. Whereas we don't infer, for example, the tree to have a mind, or Jupiter to have a mind, you know. But according to Barrett's idea, then because we have this kind of agency detection thing, we should.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
We are partly biased materialistically, not
And
completely.
also one more thing, Madan, as Khalid said, we should reject these faculties, and we don't, of course. But I think it's a false dichotomy. If you have certain false beliefs within this faculty, you should not. And nobody's saying that your whole faculty has failed you. Pretty much, certain of your beliefs are false, and that's about it. But you're not saying that the whole faculty is completely worthless, pretty much, right? Your cognitive faculty, pretty much, that comes to conclusion about agency. You can still see agency in certain other things, pretty much, and you're right about that, pretty much, right? For example, you see a car going past you, and you are, well within your rights to believe that certain agency has created it. But not all of your beliefs, you have to take them in, and you don't have to discard whole of your faculty as being, in fault, pretty much. It was partially in fault, pretty much, at that time. But you came out of it basically seeing more and more of the natural world, pretty much.
Yeah. Keep in mind, we're just assuming for now that there is a naturalness to it, that evolution selected, right? Maybe like it was for an ancestral environment, no longer functional today, or it's functional in certain contexts, but not outside of those contexts, or it was a byproduct. And we can't distinguish between which one is correct. It could be a byproduct, it could be a vestigial trait, but the mere fact that we have this knowledge should give us reason to be skeptical about the particular faculty here, or the faculties, right? Barrett doesn't seem to get it, that he thinks that if we're in an agnostic position, we can't discount it. What I would say that the fact of evolution, the fact that we can put it into those brackets, that it might be a byproduct of an adaptation, it might be a vestigial trait of a adaptation that was adaptive in a previous historical environment, or it might be only fit for certain contexts, and outside of those contexts no longer fit, and should give us great doubt without knowing which one it is, to think that we shouldn't consider it reliable until we've shown it is. So even with just at that level is already highly skeptical that this is correct. Forget the millions of other arguments that we can show that in fact it is wrong when we introduce the theory of evolution, saying that animals weren't created by agents, when we argue the theory of naturalism or physicalism, which the atheists, if they're a naturalist, can argue the completeness of physics, the fact that the physics is complete top to bottom, right? And there's no sign of any superstition or supernatural or agency or anything like that. All of these things would significantly challenge these and help us classify the naturalness that we have of this as something that is a cognitive error, not a positive epistemic belief. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. All right. Let's move on. Let's see. Maybe we'll run it for another couple of minutes and close the stream out, and let's see.
Somehow broken or misfiring because I use it to think about God. Well, then I've got a faulty theory of mind system. More importantly, billions of people around the world have faulty theory of mind systems. And suddenly, actually, that's the normal thing, is to have a faulty theory of mind system. Well, if that's right, and from a naturalist perspective, the perspective that there are no supernatural beings at all of any sort, God or anything else, from that perspective, if that's right, then we've got widespread evidence for bad cognitive faculties that are misfiring all the time. And not just misfiring, well, if they're misfiring all the time, why do we trust them in regular interpersonal interactions with each other? And so maybe we shouldn't. And so it should maybe lead us to be very skeptical about other people's minds and thoughts. Okay, are you willing to so-called bite the bullet or swallow that pill?
Right.
And on top of that, it has another interesting issue, which is if you believe that's true, then here, once again, we have evidence of a common belief-forming faculty that has been widespread, that is very widespread. You say, naturalist, that doesn't work right. And evolution made it. So it undercuts confidence in thinking that evolution by natural selection leads to truth-aimed, reliable, belief-forming faculties.
Right.
But somebody who believes in God doesn't have that problem. They go, yeah, God did it.
So
I don't have to be completely skeptical about this. I can go about my daily life. Thank you very much.
Right. So in the end, this actually makes the argument from the evolutionary argument against naturalism even stronger. Like it adds on to it.
I think it does. I think that's right. Do your listeners know what the evolution?
We had Professor James Kelly Clark, and he explained in the last discussion. So
they're just I don't think it makes the evolutionary argument from naturalism any stronger, because the evolutionary argument from naturalism isn't saying that we may have one or two defects of the brain. It's literally saying that we're literally saying that we don't have any possibility of having any true beliefs at all. So I don't think you can add to that by adding a weaker premise, which is that maybe some parts of the brain are accurate, but there might be some. So I'm not sure exactly how you can add that to the evolution. Whatever, we don't want to address that argument right now. But like I said, what he said there, Barrett said there, is that why should we trust any of these intuitions if you know, we might not be able to trust it? And I'll just submit is because we can provide independent.
Why would you trust other minds as well? Pretty much that's what his argument is. Pretty much.
Well, so, it's completely different, though, isn't it? I mean, it's trusting that our intuition that Jupiter has a creator is very different from trusting that my friend Barry, who's this living, breathing organism, human, who has a brain similar to mine, who's evolved through a similar history to mine, right? Who expresses grief on his face and pain sensors I can see under the microscope and under the MRI scans, suggesting that he probably has feeling pain, and he's gasping in agony when he stabbed him. He's probably an agent. He probably has a conscious.
The problem here is, Madan, that they are taking just a very small portion of that cognitive faculty, and implying that the whole faculty has gone awry, pretty much, in a sense, right? Which is not the case. I mean, that cognitive faculty is probably functioning, incorrectly, maybe is the right word, for a particular set of problems, but not all set of problems. And at least that's how I would think about it.
Yeah, it could very well be the fact of looking for agency behind things. Let's put it in context.
Right.
The fact of looking for agency, like the philosophy, the idea of that we infer there are other minds, the theory of mind. Maybe let's say we have a biological predisposition towards thinking that there are other minds, right? That helps us survive because we want to be able to think that there are other minds. That could be the evolutionary reason why it's there. For example, so that we can distinguish between agents and non-agents. And in the context of thinking, the mountain has an agent behind it. That is the biological mechanism going Auri. That's the cognitive bias. But in the context of using the biological mechanism in trying to infer that there's a mind behind Robert down there, he's a man. He's thinking about things. That's the theory of mind. Robert has a personality like myself. In that context, it's not Gonari. That's perfectly fine. I mean, what's the issue? In that sense, that's what evolutionary theory does. That's what a cognitive bias is. They can systematically lead us to false conclusions in certain contexts, whilst being reliable in other contexts. Right?
Right.
So he's trying to say that would be a bit of an inconsistency. Why don't we think? No, it's not an inconsistency, because remember we know it's reliable in one context, it's unreliable in another context, because of some independent grounds as well. We kind of substantiate it further, right? We can give independent arguments for thinking why there's a higher likelihood that there is a real mind. We don't just have an intuition, biological intuition, that there is a mind behind brain. We give some arguments for it. I know Plantinga disagrees. Plantinga thinks it's like a properly basic belief. I disagree. I think you can make abductive and inductive arguments. It's not just an axiom that we accept blindly, right? And in that sense, therefore, we do know, and we can distinguish between, after we've given the arguments, the effective use of that biological machinery and the ineffective use of the biological machinery when it leads us astray into illusions, right? When we start thinking the rock has a mind, the tree has a mind, the plants have a mind, this cartoon has a mind, right? The cartoon that I just drew has a mind. No, it doesn't have a mind. Why do we think that? Why do we think Brian has a mind and the cartoon doesn't have a mind? Even though both of us, in both contexts, we may have a theory of mind instinct, is because we have independent philosophical and scientific arguments to help establish that. Right? So that's it.
Yeah. True that. True. I agree. Totally agree on that. All right, Madin, I think there's probably only just a minute or half left. We should stop it here, maybe.
Do you want to quickly see what he says about Fitrah, though? I think that would be a.
Shall we do that some other time? I think they'll be much better. I think, right? We'll do that. I think we need to finish that. We need to finish that Sabur video as well as. I don't think we'll see if there's anything left there and for us to talk about. If not, we'll finish this one at least, because we still have 3 good points on this one, basically.
Yes. So on the next episode,
the natural religion we still need to talk about. I think the desert island question we need to address, and then the Fitrah. I think the most important part.
Also, I want to hear. I think his argument, his overall argument, is that certain natural beliefs are the myth. He tries to compare it to certain axioms or first principles, like the laws of logic, or sense data, or belief in an external world. None of these apparently you can't prove. For example, you can't prove them to be the case without circularity or the principle of induction. And he tries to say that if our God belief is similarly natural, then similar to those things, it's just like another first principle. And he probably then uses our plantinga to say it's a properly basic belief. It doesn't need any further justification. You don't need further justification that the external world exists. You just accept it on belief. You don't need any further justification that induction is true. You just start. That's your starting point for all thinking. You don't need a further justification for the laws of logic. That's just the starting point for all thinking. And similarly, if our brains are naturally hardwired for God, then you don't need any further justification for that. That's like another axiom. And we will address that next in the next episode, as well as the Fitrah. We will. Yeah, those will be our main go-tos.
Yeah. True. All right. I think what we need to do towards the end, and if anybody comes down up to this point, they have done really well, because I think this was a pretty deep philosophical conversation to review. Please like, subscribe, and share. And you can support us in many ways. Probably there are a couple of ways to support us on YouTube, through memberships or super chats or super whatever is out there. And you can also support us on buymeacoffee.com and Patreon, basically. And if you can't support us through any of those means, and that's perfectly fine, what you can do is to support us by sharing our channel, liking our channel, and commenting below the videos or streams. So that's all for it. Thank you everybody for joining, from myself and Mahadev. Bye for now.
All right, bye-bye.